You ever just feel heavy, like you're slogging through life, carrying this load?
Yeah.
And it feels like it's more than just your daily tasks or your worries. What if that feeling, that sort of fundamental burden, isn't just about the external stuff, but maybe the very building blocks of what you think of as you, your body, your mind? That's kind of the radical starting point for the teaching we're digging into today. We're looking at a really powerful Dhamma talk, and it's based on this ancient Pali scripture, the Baro Sutta. That means the discourse on the burden. So our aim here is to unpack what this teaching says the ultimate burden is, why carrying it brings suffering, and maybe most importantly, the path it describes for actually laying it down. We'll look at specific ideas, some Pali verses from the source, and try to make it all clear.
Yeah, and what's really striking about this teaching is how direct it is. It doesn't really beat around the bush. It gets straight to the point about the source of this burden. It kicks off with this core statement in Pali, the full line, kaṇḍa barahoro kapukolo.
Okay. Bora have panyakanda paraka pugalo. What does that mean for us?
It translates pretty directly, actually, as, verily the 5 aggregates are a burden, and the person is the burden bearer.
The 5 aggregates, panyakanda. So walk us through those. What exactly are they, according to this teaching? And why are they seen as, inherently burdensome?
Absolutely. So the source breaks down these khandhas. They're basically the components that make up the entirety of what we experience as a self. First, there's rupa, that's form, the physical body.
Okay, the body.
And the teaching describes it as heavy right from the start. Heavy in the womb, kind of cumbersome as it grows. It takes constant effort, to move it, maintain it, feed it, protect it. It even points out the physical reality that at the end, this body is so heavy, it takes effort sometimes, like 4 people just to carry it in a coffin.
Wow, okay. So it's not just a philosophical idea of weight. It's grounded in the actual tangible heaviness and the demands of having a body.
Exactly. It's very grounded. Then, after rupa, you have vedana. That's feeling.
Feelings like happy, sad, or...
Yeah, pleasant, unpleasant, or just neutral sensations, all of it. Then sanyan. That's perception. Recognizing things, labeling them.
Right. Seeing a chair and knowing chair.
Precisely. After that comes sahara. These are the mental formations or volitions. Basically, our thoughts, intentions, our will, the sort of impulses that drive us to act.
The mental chatter and urges.
Kind of, yeah. And finally, there's viññā. That's consciousness. Just the basic awareness of things, of objects.
Okay, so rupa, body, vedana, feelings.
Yeah.
Sanya, perceptions. Sahara, thoughts, intentions. And viññā, consciousness. These are the things we usually point to when we say I or me. And the pugalo, the person, that's the one who sort of identifies with all this and carries it.
That's it, exactly. The pugalo is the burden bearer. And the source is really clear on this. This burden isn't just a human thing. It exists in, all realms of existence.
All realms, like even heavenly realms.
Yes. Whether you're talking heavenly realms, human realms, or even the lower realms mentioned in Buddhist cosmology, these aggregates, in some form or another, are present. And wherever they are clung to, there's a burden. The specific weight might manifest differently, sure, but the underlying principle carrying these demanding, impermanent components of existence, it remains.
That's fascinating that it's in all realms. We often think of suffering as, tied to human physical pain or our emotional traumas.
Yeah.
But this teaching implies the burden is inherent in the actual makeup of conscious existence wherever it occurs.
That's a good way to put it. It shifts the focus. Suffering isn't just about bad events happening to us. It's rooted in the very nature of how we perceive our existence as these 5 constantly changing dependent aggregates. But the source adds another layer here, something maybe more relatable day to day. It talks about how we don't just carry our own 5 aggregates.
We take on others' burdens, too.
Exactly, like family, work, community responsibilities.
Yeah.
The teaching uses this quite vivid image. It says some people end up carrying 10, 15, up to 100 aggregates.
100 aggregates?
Yeah.
How?
Because they take on the responsibilities and the cares related to other people. Think about that feeling of responsibility for your family's well-being, or the pressure of leading a team, or maybe caring for aging parents. These roles, even if they come from love or duty, they add significant weight. The source even points to titles, like sumfar, an abbot, meaning someone who carries heavy responsibility for the community.
Yeah, that resonates. You feel that weight when you're worried about someone else or you feel responsible for them. It's like you're metaphorically carrying their load, too.
They're aggregates along with your own.
So if these aggregates are the burden, and we're the bearers, and then we add more weight through our connections. It seems like suffering is almost inevitable.
Well, that leads us right to the next core statement in the teaching. It's another key Pali verse. Paradana dukkha loke bharanikapana sukha.
Paradana dukkha loke bharanikapana sukha. Okay, what's the message there?
Taking up the burden is suffering in the world. Laying down the burden is happiness. It's a very clear contrast.
Suffering versus happiness. Simple as that.
Pretty much. The source doesn't really mince words. Carrying the burden, paradana, is identified straight up as dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness, stress. And the flip side, laying down the burden, dharanikapana, that's sukha, happiness, ease, liberation.
Okay, but let's dig into that suffering part, the dukkha. The source isn't just saying life is tough, right? It gets more specific about why carrying the aggregates is suffering.
Yes, it definitely sharpens the focus there. The suffering isn't merely from having the aggregates. The key Pali phrase it uses is panyupadana khandha dukkha.
Panyupadana khandha dukkha. And that means?
It means clinging to the 5 aggregates is suffering.
Ah, clinging. Upadan.
Exactly, upadana. The aggregates themselves are just, the raw material, the load. But the suffering, the dukkha, that comes from the clinging. The grasping, the identifying with these things is fundamentally me or mine. It's holding onto the body as if it's permanently my body, or these feelings as my essential feelings, these thoughts as who I am, instead of seeing them as, transient, impersonal phenomena just arising and passing away.
Right.
It's that clinging that makes us hurt when the body changes, or fearful when feelings shift, or frustrated when our perceptions don't match reality, or agitated by our own thoughts.
Okay, so it's not the burden itself, but our relationship to it. How tightly we hold on, like carrying a heavy backpack that's not inherently suffering, maybe just tiring. The refusing to ever take it off, even when it's crushing you. That's the suffering.
That's a really good analogy, yeah. And the opposite, bharanikapana, laying down that burden of clinging, that's the happiness. It's the release from that constant struggle, that holding on to what's inherently impermanent and ultimately not self.
Makes perfect sense, intellectually anyway. But if laying down the clinging is happiness, why is it so incredibly hard? Why don't we just, drop the backpack? The source must talk about why we struggle with this.
Oh, it absolutely does. And it gives some pretty powerful reasons for why it's so difficult. The teaching basically points to 2 main obstacles.
Okay, what are they?
The first one is described essentially as doesn't know how to let go. It's not necessarily that the person doesn't want to be free from suffering. It's that they lack the understanding, the how-to.
Like they don't have the instruction manual.
Sort of. The source uses this analogy of a small child holding a burning hot coal. The coal is causing immense pain, right? But the child doesn't know the simple action needed. Just open the fingers and drop it. They might cry or flail or try to blow on it, but they lack the fundamental knowledge of how to release it.
That's a really stark image. It points to a kind of basic ignorance about the path itself.
Exactly. And the source connects this lack of knowledge directly to not studying the Dhamma, the teachings, pariyati, not listening to wise people, not training the mind in the right way. If you don't understand what the aggregates are or how clinging operates, you won't know how to stop doing it.
Okay, so ignorance is the first hurdle. What's the second?
The second reason is framed as cannot let go. This is different from just not knowing how. Here, the person might have some understanding, maybe they've even tried to practice a bit, but they're held back by really powerful internal forces. Specifically, the source points to attachment and a kind of regret or reluctance. The Pali implies the sense of sade, like regretting the loss of something desirable.
Attachment and regret, like wanting to hold on.
Precisely. The source gives 2 more analogies here. One is the fisherman who catches a huge, valuable fish. He knows, technically, he could let it go back into the water.
Right.
But he cannot bring himself to do it. His desire for the fish, the attachment to the idea of possessing it, the potential gain, it's just too strong. He regrets the thought of letting it slip away. The other analogy is a bird caught in a trap, like a snare. The bird absolutely knows how to fly. It desperately wants to fly free, but it cannot because it's physically entangled.
The entanglement prevents it, even though it knows how and wants to.
Exactly. Its knowledge and desire are just overridden by the bonds holding it. These analogies really highlight how our own desires, our attachments, our regrets act like chains, even when we might intellectually know better.
Wow, those are powerful. Okay, so we know the aggregates are the burden. We know clinging is the suffering. And the main roadblocks are ignorance, don't know how, and attachment, cannot let go. So what's the actual path the Source lays out? How do we start laying down the burden to find that happiness?
Well, the teaching points towards a path of release, definitely. It talks about laying down this heavy burden. The Pali is nikipitva garovara, and crucially, not taking up another burden, anyana vradya.
Not taking up another, meaning not creating new clinging.
Exactly. Stop adding to the load. And this whole process is described as leading ultimately to the uprooting of craving samalatancha abhuha, craving being the root cause of the suffering cycle. And the final goal is attaining Nibbana. The phrase used is nichato parinibbutoti, which means being unbound, cooled, utterly at peace.
Nibbana, the ultimate goal. Okay, so where does the Source say we should begin this journey? What's the first step?
The starting point that's really emphasized is mindfulness and restraint. The Pali term is kaṇḍa, particularly restraint of the senses, the indriyas.
Restraining the senses.
Yeah.
Sight, sound.
Yes, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and even the mind itself is a sense door. The teaching actually contrasts two types of people using these two really potent Pali verses. The first verse describes someone who's, well, vulnerable, it goes. So banopasi viharanta indrisu asavuta bojanam yamatanyuno kusata hina viriatai vipasati marovato kufat vadubala.
Okay, that's a mouthful. What's the gist?
It translates roughly as one who dwells seeing agreeable things, unrestrained in the senses, immoderate in food, lazy, and weak in effort. Mara overcomes him, like wind felling a weak tree.
Mara, like affliction or temptation.
Yeah, the forces of suffering, delusion, death. So this paints a picture of someone just swept away by pleasant sights and sounds, no discipline in how they consume things, food being a prime example. Lazy, not putting in the effort, they're easily knocked over, metaphorically.
Like a flimsy tree in a storm. Makes sense. Easily swayed, easily broken.
Right. But then the second verse gives the alternative, the path of resilience, of progress. Asuhanupasi viharanta indrisu savuta bujanamhika matanyu sasat arada viryata matasati marovato salawapabata.
And that one means?
It describes one who dwells seeing disagreeable things, which sounds negative, but it means contemplating reality more deeply, like impermanence, the non-inherent beauty, not just the surface appeal.
Okay, seeing things as they are.
Restrained in the senses, moderate in food, faithful, or maybe better, possessing conviction, satit, and energetic in effort. Mara does not overcome him, like wind cannot shake a mountain.
A mountain versus a weak tree. That's a clear contrast.
Very clear. It really highlights how crucial that mindful restraint is guarding the sense doors. The teaching even uses phrases like kakuna savarosadu, good is restraint through the eye, and applies it to each sense. This restraint, combined with moderation, conviction in the path, sathad, and persistent effort, aradhavirya, builds the inner strength needed to withstand the forces that keep us tied to the burden.
So it starts with bringing awareness, bringing discipline to our most basic interactions with the world through our senses. Not getting swept away by every little thing, but developing some centeredness. But the Source seems to suggest this restraint, while crucial, is just the beginning, that it leads to deeper levels of practice and realization.
Yes, exactly. The teaching really emphasizes that the path isn't just about, say, theoretical understanding, pariyati, or even just the initial outward practice, paipati. It's ultimately about achieving payavetha. That's a key term. It means penetration, realization, a deep experiential knowing. True release comes from seeing the aggregates for what they actually are, not just having an idea about it.
Seeing them directly,
Yeah.
experiencing their nature.
Right. And the Dhamma talk we're drawing from goes on to describe a specific meditative path outlined in this particular tradition for achieving this deep realization. It talks about centering the mind within the body, moving awareness inward through different points or centers within. And this process involves something described as progressively shedding bodies.
Shedding bodies, that sounds pretty intense. What does that mean here?
It's a way of describing moving through different levels of identification and experience. You start with your awareness of the gross physical body. Then you move to a subtler awareness, maybe like an energy body or subtle human form. And then, as the mind gets more refined through the practice, you can access dimensions described as, say, a divine body, both gross and subtle forms of that. And eventually, even through higher, more formless realms of experience, the Brahma realms described in the texts.
Wow. So with each step inwards, the identification shifts.
That's the idea. At each level, as the mind penetrates deeper, there's a kind of shedding of the identification with the aggregates at that specific level. You're letting go of the burden as it manifests in these progressively subtler forms.
So it's like a systematic process of non-identification,
Yeah.
peeling back layers of what we think is us or
Yeah.
reality.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. And according to this teaching, this whole inward journey culminates in realizing the kaya Dhamma, the Dhamma body.
The Dhamma body.
Reaching this state is said to signify entering the stages of spiritual awakening that you find in the Pali Canon. There's a transitional stage called Gotrabu, and then the recognized noble stages, the Arya Pugalo, that's the stream enter, Sotapanna, the once-returner, Sakadagami, and the non-returner, Anagami. Each of these stages represents a deeper level of insight. That's the Payaveda, the realization, and a more profound letting go of the aggregates and the clinging that binds us to them.
So the practice leads directly to these stages of liberation.
That's the map laid out here. And the ultimate realization described is reaching the Arahant Dhamma body, Kaya Dhamma Fra Arahant. Achieving this state is equated with attaining the Viraga Dhatu, Viraga Dhamma. That's the element or the state of dispassion. Complete freedom from the opposite, the Saraga Dhatu, Saraga Dhamma, the state bound by passion and defilements.
It's passion, freedom from the clinging.
Total freedom. And the teaching stresses that this isn't just like a temporary good mood or escape. This process progressively letting go through realization at each level, culminating in the Arahant state, represents the true, permanent liberation from the whole cycle of rebirth and suffering, the Trivaya.
That's the complete laying down of the burden, never picking it up again.
That's the ultimate goal presented.
Wow. Okay. So it's quite a journey. From understanding this basic problem, the aggregates, as a burden we cling to, all the way through this, well, profound and systematic path of inward practice, realization, to finally completely let go.
That really is the arc presented in this teaching, yeah. We started by seeing that the 5 aggregates, the Panyikakan, are the fundamental burden, and that our suffering, dukkhan, comes directly from clinging, upadana, to them.
Right.
And the path to happiness, sukha, is clearly shown as laying down this burden, paranikapana.
And the practical starting points involve things we can actually do, cultivating mindfulness and restraint, especially with our senses, plus things like moderation, having conviction or faith in the path, and putting in persistent effort, these aren't just passive ideas, they're active practices that build the capacity for that deeper letting go.
Absolutely. This teaching from the Bhara Sutta, as illuminated by the Dhamma talk we looked at, it offers this really comprehensive framework. It tells you, the listener, the burden bearer, the pugalo, exactly what that fundamental burden consists of. And it outlines a path challenging, yes, but specific from ethical restraint and mental discipline right through to deep meditative realization. A path that can lead you to ultimately become unbound, Nichado, and realize that true lasting peace, parinibbutoti.
So here's a final thought to maybe chew on. If this teaching is right, if our very self, these 5 aggregates, is the heavy burden, what does it mean for you to start looking at the components of your own experience? Your body, your feelings, perceptions, thoughts, consciousness, not as this solid, permanent you, but maybe just as this dynamic, transient load, a load that, from this perspective, can be understood, worked with, and maybe ultimately laid down completely. Something to contemplate as you navigate your own experience of weight and lightness in life.